All right, it is Friday. It is 7 p.m. Central Time, 5 p.m. Pacific Time, where our newest best friend is joining me for another wonderful evening of shelter in place, or as we like to say, sip digital wine tasting. Martin Cody here with Cellar Angels. Don't be confused by the logo over Steve Law's head. We just haven't figured out the technology yet. So we're all about wine. We're all about giving. We're all about introducing you to some people that we think are so special. We wanted to spend some time with them on camera, learn a little bit about what's going on in the vineyard, learn a little bit about what's going on with regards to how they got into this crazy race and this crazy job and everything else. And this week we've got the pleasure of introducing you to Steve Law, the founder, winemaker of McLaren Wine. Steve, thank you so much for joining us.
Flanshaw, good evening.
Good evening. I like it. It is evening out on the East Coast, 8 p.m. Out there. So hopefully they're still up and they're surviving. And speaking of surviving, we know there's a lot going on in the world. It is absolutely crazy times that none of us have ever experienced. And if you have experienced it, please call me, because that means you would have lived through the 1918 flu pandemic. And I would love to have you on the show because you're 105 plus years of age. But these are scary times. These are interesting times. We don't want little of the times we do is recognize that as a human species, we need to socialize. So just because shelter in place doesn't mean don't socialize. And so this is our little effort to relax, add a little levity, add a little entertainment, and learn why on earth this beverage is so special to us. And we can think of no better way to do it than introduce you to the people that actually make it. And without further ado, Steve, I detect a little bit of an accent that is not Northern California. So tell the folks and tell us where you're from originally.
So normally when people come into the tasting room and they detect a slight accent, I tell them I'm from North Texas. And that's how it starts. But unfortunately, a couple of people who have come into the tasting room have actually been from North Texas and have said, no, you're not. No. So I've had to explain it's a little bit further north and a little bit further east. I'm actually originally from Scotland.
Okay. Whereabouts in Scotland?
So I was born in Edinburgh. I grew up just north of Edinburgh in a little town called Dunfermline. Hence my, I am the close to being the sole supporter of Dunfermline Athletic Football Club.
Nice. That is outstanding. When did you leave Scotland? What age?
I was 21.
21. Interesting. You leave Scotland at the exact age in the United States when you can start drinking. Is there a correlation there?
Yeah, but in Scotland, you're allowed to start drinking in Scotland as soon as your nose gets above the bar height, because before that, the barkeep can't actually hear what you're saying.
Or see you. So as soon as you
see you. No, it's difficult. So yes, we drink. We start a little earlier in Scotland.
I'm a big fan of that philosophy. A couple housekeeping items. First of all, hello to Carrie, who is here in Chicago, Laura Heffernan, Northern Illinois, Karen McElwain, who's checking in from Montana, Julie Fogarty, and I need to go through some housekeeping items. Just real quickly, there's a tasting kit right now on the Cellar Angels website. You can go to the website, and it's actually called the Sip Tasting Series Kit. So you can buy that kit, and you will have a bottle. It'll ship out on Monday. You'll have a bottle of every single one of the next 7 tastings that we're doing for the next 7 Fridays in a row, and you will be set. And for those people that are in states where the liquor stores and wine stores are closed, this is for you. Also, we had several folks last week. We were trying to double the contributions to one of our favorite charity partners, World Central Kitchen. And WCK is founded by Chef Jose Andres, who literally does some amazing things and goes into basically natural disaster areas around the world that have had earthquakes, typhoons, tornadoes, floods, hurricanes, whatever, and he starts cooking for people that have been displaced. Well, now WCK is doing this on a national level because of the pandemic of people that just don't have food. So again, we're going to double all contributions. Disaster relief is the top charity in our selection of drop downs. You can go to the Cellar Angels website, order your wine, and pick WCK, and we will double all contributions. Bill Best, how are you, my friend? Good to see you. Thank you for jumping in. So 21 years of age, you left Scotland. And brothers and sisters, do you have any of those? Older, younger, what are they?
I have a younger brother, and he also left Scotland. Actually, it's Scotland's largest export is people.
What age were you?
So poor.
What age was your brother?
He left when he was about 24, 25.
Is there any type of message that you were trying to send your parents, or was it
My
just?
mother has never forgiven us. And it's why I named my Sauvignon Blanc after her.
Oh, nice. So you left Scotland at the age of 21,
Yes.
and you went where?
I went to France. I moved to France. It was back in the 90s. It was actually in 1990. I moved down to Paris and started working in tech. And so, because I graduated in Edinburgh, and I actually graduated on a Wednesday, left Scotland on a Friday, and started work on Monday.
Holy cow. And what type of technology? It's funny. Last week we had an aerospace engineer. The week before we had another aerospace engineer. You started out in technology, and you're in Paris working in tech. Where did the wine passion come from?
So it was funny because when I left Scotland, I didn't really know what wine was. I mean, we drank wine at Christmas time from time to time, but it came out of a box mostly. So it wasn't stuff that you would want to share with friends. So when I moved to France, I got friends with a bunch of guys because it was the first job for a lot of people coming out of universities in France as well. And so we got friends with a bunch of guys and a bunch of people, and they were all into wine. And they introduced me to it, and we were opening up bottles, and I was like, "What is this?" And I went, "Well, that's wine, Steve." And you went, "Oh, wow, it tastes good." And so it was really they introduced me to it. They introduced me to the wine passion and the wine. But the thing that was nice is it was just a bunch of kids out of uni, and so we would dive into somebody's car pretty much every weekend. Not every weekend, but most weekends, and we would drive. Or we would drive to Champagne, or we'd drive to Chablis, we'd drive to Loire. And these guys all had their black books. Their black books passed on from their grandfathers to their fathers to them. So if you went to this region, these are the 3 or 4 addresses you should try. And so it was like, I didn't have to waste my time trying to find places. It was these guys were just taking me, all my friends were taking me to places that had been in their family for years. And it was really a fantastic introduction to wine.
So that's interesting from a geography standpoint and a national heritage standpoint, if you will, because you started drinking in Scotland the minute you could get your nose above the bar. The same thing happens in France. They just do it with wine instead of obviously your native drink. But their black books have the names of great wineries and chateaus and properties. In the United States, our black books were completely different. It had special names in them, but it wasn't anything that was passed down from 2 or 3 generations.
So that was red. That was a red book in France.
There was a red. Okay, good. So they did have that, or a red light district of some sort, but a red book. So
allegedly.
A couple other folks. There's another Elizabeth Heffernan, John Lalaganis, a very good friend of the company, and part of the reason why we're still in existence is wine content and educational material is off the charts good. Corey and Renee, hello to you. Tom Randall, you have been a supporter since day one, 10 plus years ago. Amy Stasny, I hope you are actually surviving here in the Chicago area. And back to these weekend jaunts in France. That to me, I'm a little bit in awe of just every weekend you get to go to Chablis, you get to go to Champagne, you get to go to the Loire, and you spend the weekend down there. Was it an instant immersion where you thought, oh, wow, this is freaking fantastic, and you were just immediately smitten with it? Or did it take a little bit of time for you to go, okay, not for me? Walk me through that little process.
It was interesting because I remember the company, when I first moved over to France, I had 3 words of French. That was basically it. I couldn't speak French. I had high school French, but I'd been at uni. So the company I was working for, Philips, actually put me in a student flat. And none of the students spoke any English. And so we would get together most nights for dinner together and sit around the table. And I'd be just sitting there watching these guys, talking in French and not have a clue what was going on until the wine bottles came out. And then you would be reading the label and going, oh, okay. And then you ask a few questions and get into it. And so it really gave me an access from that perspective. But I remember the first bottle, one of the first bottles that just struck me was a good friend I was working with. His dad was a wine collector. And he heard I was from Scotland, and it was the first Christmas I was going to go home. And so he said to me, I'll swap you a bottle of wine for a bottle of whiskey. And I said, No problem at all. So he gave me a bottle of 1972 Givre Chambertin, and I took it home to my mum and dad, and we had it for Christmas. And it was one of those bottles that you open up, and it's a 72 Givre Chambertin, and it was just absolutely outstanding. And so I was thinking of getting him a bottle of Dewar's or some cheap whiskey, but then I realized, no, I'm going to have to get some really good stuff for this guy. But it was one of those wines that just changes your life. You know, it changes your world in terms of what you're thinking. So, and from that moment on, I discovered that I had a bit of a palate, and I had the passion for it. And the passion came from a bunch of my friends too. I mean, they were the ones that gave me the passion for it. But it was the palate I discovered that I had. And then from then on, it's been a slippery path ever since, to be honest.
That's pretty interesting. I like the fact that you were immediately smitten with it, but it was almost an immersion process, because you're sitting at a table at 21 years of age and everyone's speaking French and you don't speak the language. You almost have to learn what they're talking about, or essentially you're going to be isolated forever. And so you have to learn the language very quickly. Speaking of drinking, what is in your glass right now? And hello, Jeff and Jane Greasy, and to the Marcellas. Glad you joined us. What do you have in your glass?
I have my 2018 Sauvignon Blanc, which I call Lee's, which is named after my mum, Lee. And it's from a little vineyard that I've been working with since 2012. And it's in Dry Creek, which is from where we live currently right now. It's maybe about 45 minutes north of here. A little vineyard in Dry Creek, and I get 2 rows. So I only get 2 rows, basically about 2 tons every year. The gentleman who owns this vineyard, Wayne Rogers, is a wonderful man, great farmer. He's been an old-timer from Healdsburg, and he supplies most of his fruit to Quivira and to Dry Creek vineyards. But he farms 2 rows differently for me, and I get the 2 rows in the middle, 58 and 59. He calls me the peacekeeper, because the 2 of those guys, Dry Creek and Quivira, could never agree on where one guy's block started and the other guy's block finished. So he says, I'm sick of this. I'm going to give you the 2 rows in the middle, and you can be called the peacekeeper. So I get the same rows every year, and I make essentially about 100 to 125 cases of this wine every year. So a very small production. And the reason I make it that small is because my mum can't drink much more than that. So I like to keep it, down.
I like that. I think it's fascinating, because when we tell people after 10 years that they would be amazed at how some of the vineyard blocks are divided. It's not as crazy as some of the Napoleonic laws and things of France and Burgundy and those sorts of things. But you really do, as you just mentioned, you get to farm and have fruit access for 2 rows for the Sauv Blanc.
Yep. Wayne is a very nice man. He's a very, very good, fantastic farmer. But he gave me a chance in 2012. And he said to me, I'm kind of full with the 2 guys, and they're full. And I had a chat with them and convinced them to give me a little bit of fruit. And he liked what I did with his fruit in 2012. And he said, okay, I'll give you a couple of rows going forward. And I said, okay, could we make a few changes to how we farm? And he said, sure. And so we sat down, and we sit down most years, and we taste the wine, and we kind of give him feedback, and we kind of discuss what we had tried to do during the year, and then how we had reacted to the changes that Mother Nature comes along with, and then we taste the wine. And so he actually likes the wine, so he's willing to put the extra time and effort in, which is very much appreciated.
Awesome. And so you mentioned that you wanted him to change a couple things with the wine, and what exactly did you have him change with the wine, or with the growing side of things? And what were you particularly after in order to have the final product reflect those changes?
So one of the things that I like in my wines, in all my wines, including the Sauvignon Blanc, is, and I guess it comes from more of a French palate, because I've definitely been influenced by the French in my palate, is I like acid in wine. And the reason I like acid in wine is because I like wine with food. And you really need to have acid in wine to pair it with the acid in the food. And so one of the things for me with Dry Creek is Dry Creek's a very warm area. It gets a lot of sun. And so it's very easy for the fruit to get too much sun and start to get too high in ripeness, and then also get too low in acidity. And so it's a challenge every year to try and do that. There's some of his growers, or some of his clients want to have a little bit higher alcohol, so a little bit higher Brix, a little bit lower acidity. But for myself, I like to have a little bit higher acidity and a little bit lower on the Brix level, just so that I can make my wines. Typically, my Sauvignon Blanc is anywhere between 12.5% and 13.5% alcohol.
Okay.
And that's really the range that I'm aiming for. So we have to do that through canopy management, through pruning, through different other techniques that we do during the year to protect the crops. And then also in terms of when I harvest, I typically am the first one to harvest on his vineyard.
Oh, wow. Do you know a young lady named Marjorie Leeds?
Yes, Marge.
Marge has, and this is a safe zone. So what happens here, it's only about 5 of us right now. So what happens here stays here. Okay. So Marge has offered voluntarily that she drank about 2.5 cases of this wine last year. So I'm very appreciative of that. And if it ever warms up here in the Chicago area, we're going to be right behind her.
I'm surprised that Marge has only drank 2.5 cases. I would have thought 2.5 cases would have been her halfway point.
I will let her know. Oh, actually, you just did. So, the Sauv Blanc that we're drinking, many of us right now, from you, is different than the New Zealand style Sauv Blanc. And you mentioned a couple indicators or influencers on that. Obviously, canopy management and how much growth you allow the cluster, which is the canopy one who, it's not the umbrella that we have on our back decks. It's a different form of canopy. Same object or same objective though. Keep the sun off of them. Managing that, getting ripeness, and so how did you want to strike that balance? And is it typical of what you grew up tasting in the Loire? Is that what kind of prompted that desire?
So the Loire is actually an interesting. It's funny. There are definitely 2 different styles of Sauvignon Blanc winemaking. There's the New Zealand style, which is much more influenced by the stainless steel, and in France, and it's really because of the production is much smaller. Because if you think about the hundreds of thousands of gallons that are being made of Sauvignon Blanc in New Zealand, it's very difficult to get. You can't get more than 60 gallons in a barrel. And so if you're making hundreds of thousands of gallons every year, you're going to have hundreds of thousands of barrels. It just doesn't become economic. And so in France, the production was much smaller. And so a lot more of the production was done in neutral barrels and neutral barrel fermentation and then neutral barrel aging. And except Sancerre. Sancerre is the only region in the Loire where they use a little bit more stainless steel. But the Puy-Fumé, Menetou-Salon, Savinière, all the different regions down there, they all use neutral barrels and neutral barrels. And so that's the style I prefer. And so the way that I was trying to do this was I do pick a little bit earlier. And the reason I'm picking earlier is to keep the sugars down so I can keep my alcohols a little bit more, a little bit lighter, but also to keep the acid, because the acid drops as the sugar rises. And so I'm really trying to pick the fruit before the acid gets to a point where I feel it's going to get a little bit too big on the palate, a bit too juicy. So I'm picking it for nice acidity. But then what I'm doing in the winery to offset that acidity is to put it into barrels, neutral oak barrels, to ferment it, and then stirring it in the lees during the fermentation process, but also during the aging process. And what that does is it gives you that nice creaminess in the mid palate, and gives you that nice body to the wine, and that balances against the acidity. So you've got the two separate parts. You've got a nice acidity, but you've got a lovely round, soft, creamy mouthfeel to the wine, which helps with the fruit development as well. And so it's going to be a little bit more tropical versus the citric or the grassy. You're going to get a little bit more of those key lime, but you're also going to get things like tropical fruits, guava, passion fruit, different things like that too, which is kind of nice.
So it's fantastic. I mean, we're always looking for a great crisp wine in the Midwest, and you can get burnt out on New Zealand Sauv Blanc. And so this has got some great nuance and elegance and body to it. Like you mentioned, that creaminess, which is delicious, but it still has the acid in it, which is the refreshing crispness that cleanses the mouth, if you will, that really sharpens everything up. And you talked specifically about wanting that from a pairing with food. Yes. What foods, hit the home run with this in your eyes that is absolutely tailor-made?
So my wife and I love cheese, And so we love this wine with things like brie. We like it with goat's cheese. So you have a nice goat cheese from Laura Chanel, which is a nice local Sonoma producer here. They have some nice goat cheese, but the goat cheese has a little bit higher acidity to it anyway, has a little bit more of a bite. And what that does is it goes really well with a bite in the Sauvignon Blanc, and the Sauvignon Blanc will actually just soften it out a little bit more. It just rounds it off that nice little bit too. But so there's a couple of cheeses we love. Brie with white with Sauvignon Blanc is just fantastic. But if you're wanting to pair it with more like a fish or something, we love it with shellfish. So crab, lobster, oysters. It's fantastic with oysters. Just something with shellfish. It's wonderful, fresh, really nice and fresh in the summertime.
That is awesome. That actually just sounds like a great pairing. So on the farming technique, well, actually, let me get back to France, because I love your Scottish accent, but when a Scotsman speaks French, I haven't heard that too often.
It is very possible for me to do the French accent also.
I would like you to speak Scottish with a French accent.
You know what I used to do when I was presenting to the team down there? I used to actually stand up in front of folk, the whole French guys, and I used to do my presentations. The presentations sometimes were because we would have visiting people coming in, so we'd have to do them in English. But I would do my presentation in English, but I would do it with an outrageous French accent. And I would have all my French mates start chucking pencils and pens at me. We don't sound like that. No, you do.
Yes, you do. Absolutely. No, good stuff. So I mean, the romance of going to these wine regions in France on the weekends as a 21, 22-year-old is still fantastic in my eyes. You fell in love with the Rhone region. Why specifically Rhone, considering that the proximity to Bordeaux is not too much further away, and its certain claim to fame around the world? What drew you to the Rhone region?
So actually, it was my job. My job changed. I joined HP down in the Rhone area. They were down actually in a little town called L'Île d'Abo, which is just on the east side of Lyon, and between Lyon and Grenoble. And so I moved down there to work with HP because I'd done my thesis with HP when I was in Scotland. So it's a company I loved working for at the time. So I went back to working for HP down there in their PC division. And that dates me because that was way back when they were actually making PCs in France. But they don't do that anymore.
With 5.25-inch floppy disks and 3.5-inch disks.
Yes. Oh, yes.
Yep.
The first hard disk drive I worked on was a 20 megabyte.
That's embarrassing. Now
I remember standing in front of the CEO of HP's PC division at the time because I was in the PC or the hard disk drive division or part. We were in procurement, and I had to stand in front of this guy and explain to him why we thought people were going to need more than 100 megabytes on a single spindle in a hard disk drive, because he was convinced that was ridiculous. And I was like, no, people are going to need more than 100 megabytes on a single spindle.
You're right. And now we have
today
terabyte jump drives that it's crazy.
Yeah. Your phone has more than that.
Yeah. How old were you when you left France?
So I actually was in France for 6 years. So I was about 27. And I came over to the US. I worked over here for 5 years. And then I joined another company that sent me back to France. And I worked over there for another 5 years.
So when you were here in the US, where were you? Palo Alto with HP or?
Yeah, actually, I was down in San Jose.
Okay.
Do you know the way?
And then you spent some time there and then worked for another company, went back to France. Where were you there?
I was back in Paris.
Okay.
Yeah, back in Paris. But in the meantime, when I was down with HP, and I was down, that's when I got to meet with a couple of guys who were influences on me from a winemaking perspective. It was a guy called Yves Cuiron and Francois Villard, and I got friends with them and drank quite a bit of wine together with them. And they were a couple of winemakers, and we met up later on in my story, but we met up again because we became friends, and we used to meet up. And when I moved to California, they would actually come over and we would have dinner together down in some of the restaurants in Los Gatos and stuff like that. And that was actually the beginning of the end for me, because they were the ones that kind of pushed me into doing this.
And so these are the parts of the story that I marvel at. So you leave a perfectly safe job that you've been at and pursued a tech degree from university and made quite a good living, and yet you decide, I'm going to make wine. And not only do you have to sell yourself on that idea, you genuinely and generally have to actually sell a significant other on the idea. How did you manage that?
Well, it was fortunately I got started as a hobby. My wife called it my hobby, and it was she thought it was an expensive hobby, which I told her it is an expensive hobby, but it could be worse. I could be driving Formula One cars, and it could be even worse.
That's
But
right.
so I started it as a hobby, and I fell in with another winemaker when I was working in California, in Sonoma, or sorry, in San Jose. I got friends with a winemaker up in Dry Creek. His name was Mike. I got friends with him, and I helped him for a couple of vintages. And I just helped. I was just helping him make his wine. He's the winemaker, and I was just basically, because he's on his own, and I was just giving him as much labor as I could possibly do, and he was giving me some wine. And it was a great experience, because I realized that Michael was actually making his wine very similarly to how Yves and Francois were doing it in France, which was very artisan-based, very small production, and it was actually quite interesting. And so I got really good friends with Michael, and I started helping him. And then in 2007, I said to him, is there any chance I could make a wee bit of Syrah on the side? And he says to me, well, if you continue to help me make my Zinfandel, because that's what he makes, wonderful, wonderful Zinfandel too. And he said, and he's on his own. He said, if you continue to help me make my Zin, I'll let you make your Syrah here. And so I made, in my very first vintage, I got fruit from the Unti vineyard, which was just down the road in Dry Creek, and I made 4 barrels of Syrah, and that's how I started, and it grew from there. And so eventually I had to give up my job, because I was taking vacation hours to do harvest, and that's how I was doing it. I was saving up vacation all year just so that I could take my vacation as a block and do harvest. And in 2011, I ran out of vacation hours, and that's when I had to sit down with Heather, who's my wife, and say to her, it's decision time. Would you mind teaching for a few more years? And apparently the key word there was few, because unfortunately my wife is still teaching.
That's interesting. Now there's some parallels there with our hobby of wine, and I like the transition. You and I just both finished our Saint Blancs, so I like to transition to the Syrah conversation.
Oh, cool. Do I get to go into Syrah now?
Yeah, going into Syrah, my friend. And it's funny because Denise and I had a hobby, and it was wine as well. I like the path you've chosen as to being a vigneron and owning your own winery. We realized that we had a problem with our hobby, because when you have 10, 12, 13 wine club memberships and the UPS delivery person is on your Christmas list for cards, it's an issue. And then you're also spending a fortune. So we'd solved our problem a little bit differently. We decided, rather than paying full retail, let's just open up a retail store and get everything it costs. And so that worked out fantastic. And then the recession hit from, in 2008 and 9 when we owned the store. And fast forward to 2013, we decided, hey, let's figure out something on the digital side, because we still love this hobby. We still love meeting people like yourself. And we just have to, let's just give this a few more years type of thing. So I'm familiar with the few more years.
You probably still had your monthly subscription to the Betty Ford Clinic, and you were thinking, why would I give this up?
I don't know who put me on Hazelton's mailing list, but every now and then I look at that very seriously. So the Syrah, let's talk Syrah a little bit. And I think Syrah gets a bad knock in the United States for all but serious wine drinkers. And I remember, and John Laliganis, if he is still on, he worked with us a little bit at the store. We tried passionately to push people outside of the big six, right? Outside of Cab Merlot Pinot, Sauv Blanc Chardonnay, and I don't even know what the sixth white is, and into more of the Rhone varietals, into the Syrah, the Mourvedres, the Viogniers, the Roussins. And it's a very hard wine to sell from a socioeconomic standpoint, because people want the Cab, they want the Pinot, they want the Merlot, but very few people recognize, or not enough people recognize, just how freaking amazing Syrah is both with food and also from a QPR, quality to price ratio, off the charts. And so was it these weekend trips down to the Rhone every weekend? Was it someone that turned you on to a great bottle? Walk me through how you got hooked on Syrah.
So, I mean, my thing with Syrah was I was living...
What year are we drinking here? What do you have?
2014.
2014. Great.
2014 Samanthas from Russian River Valley. No, I got into Syrah when I was living very close to the Rhone Valley. I mean, I was literally from where I was living to get to Yves' place was about 45 minutes to 50 minutes. So it was a very small commute. And it was a lot longer to get home, actually. It was a lot easier to get there. But it was, so I got into Syrah when I was down there, though, because for me, Syrah was a fantastic food wine. And it's funny, you kind of hit on the food pairing thing, is Syrah in the Rhone Valley, when you get those beautiful Saint-Josephs, you get some of those Hermitage, Crozes Hermitage, you get those wines and they're absolutely fantastic with food. And I loved that about Syrahs. And it was, you go into restaurants, and it was, at the time I was, it was my second job and I wasn't very well off. And so it was, you go into restaurants and you're looking at a cab from Bordeaux, and you're looking at a Syrah from the Rhone Valley. There's always a price differential, and you're thinking, I can't afford to buy the Bordeaux, but I can definitely afford the Syrah. And so you get into them. And so when you start playing around with Syrahs, you realize that Syrah can pair with fish, can pair with chicken, it can pair with pork, it can pair with barbecue ribs, it can pair with steak, it can pair with a chair on a deck with a patio and a view. I mean, it can pair with anything.
It pairs well with naps. It pairs well.
Absolutely. So for me, the trick with the Syrahs from the Northern Rhone is they're lighter, they're fresher, there's a freshness to them. There's a lightness, necessarily comes, I think, based on the fact that Northern Rhone is a lot further north than we are latitude-wise, and so they're getting much less sun than we get here in California, and much less sun than they're getting in Australia too, because I mean they're getting a lot more sun down there. But the fact that this coming from that northern area, it keeps a certain freshness in the wine. It keeps a certain floral aspect in the wine, a pretty element in the wine, and so the wine doesn't become this heavy, masculine, furry thing that you've got to stab before you can drink. It's actually a very feminine, pretty, light wine that you can actually really enjoy with foods. And that was the moment when I came over to California and realized, because I was drinking a lot of Syrahs from California at the time, I realized that the Syrahs from California are very, very different, just because of where they're grown. And that was what led me, from a winemaking perspective, when I first made my first vintage in 2007 from Dry Creek Valley. I realized, I mean, it was wonderful working with the Untis. They were lovely, lovely people. But I realized I was not going to make the style of wine I like to drink because it was just too hot. It was just, Dry Creek is just too hot. And so that's where I started looking for the cooler climate regions, started looking for vineyards where the guys had planted their vineyards with sea fog influence. And that's what led me to Russian River, to Bennett Valley, to areas where there was a lot more fog, because that was what was regulating my sun hours. Because I can't do anything about my latitude. I am where I am. But in order to try and regulate or attenuate the amount of sun that the vines are getting, sea fog. I mean, we have tons of sea fog around here every single summertime. And so by using that sea fog to keep the vines from getting too much sun, I could make more of a Northern Rhone style. And that was the thing.
That's interesting, because I was going to ask you, how on earth do you make a cool climate Syrah in Dry Creek, which is noticeably warmer than the Northern Rhone, but you hit upon it right there. And I think it's interesting for people, and a lot of our viewers are on right now, and they're thanking UPS for getting them their wine today because they're drinking your Syrah. So thank you, UPS. I know that hasn't been easy.
Cheers to UPS.
Yeah, I don't know if I've ever toasted UPS before. So.
I can guarantee I never have.
I can promise you I've cursed them on occasion, but toasting is much better. I prefer that. So the sea fog and the coastal influence is big, and that actually makes a lot of difference. And for the person who doesn't recognize cool climate and how important it is, what are we talking about from a degrees? Is it like 55 to 75? Is it, talk to me a little bit about that, and then I'm going somewhere with this.
So it's different. It's a wee bit different. I look at it a wee bit different rather than the temperature, because the temperature actually in California, it gets, in the afternoon, it doesn't matter where you are, it's bloody hot, especially for Scottish people. We're not used to weather above 70. So It gets very hot in the afternoon. But for the way I'm looking at it is more from a sun hours. So for example, my coolest climate vineyard, which is called a Toussaint vineyard, typically it's my most northern Rhone style of Syrah every year. It's from a vineyard that's quite far out west in Russian River. That vineyard is covered in fog until 11 or 11:30 every single day in the summertime.
Wow.
Scottish people live out there.
I love it. Jacqueline Renee, if you are still on, thank you so much for joining us. She is another winemaker who will be featuring in 2 weeks, her Pinot Noir. And then, Steve, if I can trouble you for a second, we're going to do another little housekeeping check on some things. I did want to, over the years, we've had a lot of success with viewer mail during this segment, so it's fun to read some things from the audience over the years that they've sent in. But again, if you just joined us, there's a sip tasting kit on the Cellar Angels website. You can go ahead and purchase that, and you will be set for the next 7 tastings. The disaster relief, we are doubling the contributions again to WCK. So if you, on your checkout process at cellarangels.com, go ahead and hit WCK. And I would be remiss, disaster relief is within WCK. I just said that, thank you. The studio, the production people they are loud. I can't turn them off. Sometimes
the staff these days.
It's just really the voices in my head, quite honestly. We also believe very strongly in what we're doing and helping others. And sometimes we certainly 100% of the time can't do it all ourselves, and we ask for help. So in week 1, when we did this, there's a famous basketball player named LeBron James. And LeBron James had tweeted the night before our tasting that he was looking for a vino partner. And so we thought, hey, audience, if anybody knows LeBron James, he's probably the most famous basketball player right now on the planet, hook us up. Because he's got a foundation, and that was 2 weeks ago. And I am happy to report. I'm not happy to report. We still don't have any contact with LeBron James. So if there's anything any of our audience members can do, that would be great. I'm going to just throw this out to the universe and our listeners and our viewers or listeners. It's like we're on a radio show. If anybody knows Mark Wahlberg. Apparently, Mark Wahlberg is a big wine guy and has a massive cellar and is very philanthropic. So we'd like Mr. Wahlberg to get in touch with us, have his people call our people. And then I did get one letter, or actually one that Denise chose. Dear Martin, I am uncertain who taught you anything about fashion or manners, but you need a refresher on both. Do better, it's almost, this is the letter you picked up? Do better, it's almost too much to watch. And please call me Love Mom. All right, good. So let's talk about the Syrah. I'm a little bit embarrassed that that's the one that we chose to read out loud. Syrah, is it your cool weather grape? Is it just Rhone? Is it all of the Rhone varietals? Is it Grenache? Is it Mourvèdre? Or really is it Syrah that sings to you?
I'm just having difficulty following that letter from your mum.
Yeah, she can call me. It's a 2-way street, okay?
Good luck with that.
She's in an independent living center, can't work the remote control, but found time to write a letter.
Yes, so Syrah. So this is the Samantha Syrah. So this is typically my Samantha's is typically my middle of the road cool climate, if you like, because I like to make a range of Syrahs. I like to make a range of cool climate Syrahs. So I go from a vineyard like a Toussaint, for example, which is getting fogged in until 11:30 every single day in the summertime, to my warmest one, which is getting fog burning off about maybe 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning. And so there's a difference. There's a big difference across the thing. Samantha's is in Russian River. It's only 5 miles away from a Toussaint, but it's a completely different style. And it's just because it gets that little bit extra sun every day. It just gets that little bit extra sun, so it pushes a little bit more ripeness to the wine. I like to pick Samantha's vineyard at a bricks level. I know you don't want to talk about bricks, but at a bricks level that will give me an alcohol about 13.5 alcohol, because I like the weight of the wine when it's about 13.5, 13.6 alcohol. I like the weight of the wine. It tends to be a wee bit lighter, goes great with different foods. This Syrah, this is the 14. This was a great vintage. I really like this wine. It's a wine that's going to really age well too, because you can tell it's got a lovely acidity to the wine. And that again comes from the fact I'm picking it a little bit on the earlier side, but it's got tons of flavor. And it just shows that you don't need alcohol for flavor.
Well, it's interesting that you said it can age well. Okay,
absolutely.
This is a 2014, which sadly in America, we would consider that an older wine. But you're telling us now it can age well. What do you think the staying power is on this in years and longevity?
I don't think this has reached its drinking age yet. I think another 6 months. I think when the weather starts to warm up around here this year, I think the 2014 will really start to go. My Syrahs, it depends on the vintage. I think my Syrahs are aging right now. It's difficult because my first vintage was 2007, but I'm estimating between 12 and 15 years for the Syrahs.
Wow, that's awesome. And a gentleman named Brian Faden. Do you know Brian?
Yeah.
Brian wants to know who's the designer you're wearing. Actually, Brian doesn't want to know that. Brian wants to know what is the difference between Syrah and Shiraz.
Shiraz and Syrah. So Shiraz and Syrah are essentially the same grape. The Australians had a genius move, and way back they decided when they planted Syrah in Australia that they were going to call it Shiraz, so that when you buy a bottle of Shiraz on the store, you know that it's a Syrah from Australia.
Ah, so it was a complete marketing move.
It was a marketing move, and then what happened was all the southern hemisphere countries followed suit, and so now South Africa, New Zealand, if you buy a bottle of Shiraz, typically, I mean, I don't think it's a golden rule, but it's typically if it's Shiraz, it's from the southern hemisphere, and Syrah is more from the northern hemisphere. But for me, there's a complete different, stylistically, there's a huge difference between a Shiraz and a Syrah. The Syrah for me is more of a northern Rhone, cooler climate, whereas Shiraz is unapologetically big, bold. You know, they're bold wines. I mean, they're 15.5, 16% alcohol wines. You know, make sure you're sitting down when you're tasting them.
Yeah. Jane Greasy, a longtime angel, wants to know what chocolate would you pair with this Syrah?
Oh, chocolate. I am not a chocolate fan with wine, I'm afraid. So I'm not really one to help you. If my wife had been here, if Heather had been here, she might have been able to help you with that. But I just don't like chocolate with wine for some reason. For me, this wine with a pork tenderloin crusted with fennel seeds would just be perfect.
So far, I'm hearing, and I'll look at Denise, I'm hearing like I'm hearing what you're dropping with regards to Martin and Denise. You guys need to come over for shellfish, Sauv Blanc, oysters, pork and fennel, and Syrah, is I think what you're trying to say.
And that's the first course, Martin.
I'm a huge fan. And by the way, we hadn't cracked the 14 yet, so this is a first for us. The nose is fantastic. And it's interesting that you described it earlier, that it's lighter and it's prettier, but it's not prettier you mentioned feminine, and I agree with you. It's not that muscular, cloying Australian Shiraz that's going to hit you in the face at 17.5 alcohol. But it's also not that perfumey, off-putting, really type of aromatic. It has depth and beautiful aromas that are just, I mean, granted, I'm drinking out of a BV7, which is one of our favorite wine glasses from an Italian producer, Bottega del Vino, but the nose is amazing. And then when you get into it, and now that it's opened up for about a half hour or so, you're right, it is just mouth-coating, luscious fruit that begs for something that has some acid. So it begs for one of those pork tenderloins that you're talking about that has a little bit of fat to it to be able to cut through that acid. I completely agree.
So you see, one of the things for me in my wines is when you're tasting my wines, I never want the wine when you're tasting it and you've got it on your palate and you swallow it. I never want your palate to feel loaded by it. I never want your palate to feel heavy with the wine, because that for me, and that again comes from more from the French perspective, but that wine, a heavy wine is not going to be a food wine because it's going to compete with the food versus complement the food. And that's what I'm trying to do with these wines, is when you taste this wine and you have it on your palate, it's from a cooler climate, but it should energize your palate, should make you salivate, should make you think, what can I eat with this? What, there's a cheese here in Sonoma, a cheese producer in Sonoma, the Vela, a very small producer. They've been making it for, I don't know for how many years. It's a very, very old producer. They have a little cheese factory on 2nd Street East in Sonoma, and they make a cheese called the Dry Jack. And it's from the Vela Cheese Factory, and it's called Dry Jack. There is an enzyme in that cheese that with Samantha's is unbelievable. And we discovered it one night by pure chance. My wife is a teacher, and she was teaching. They had a teacher appreciation day that day, and all the parents brought in food for the teachers and stuff, and there was way too much food. So at the end of the day, all the teachers divvied up the food, and Heather just happened to come home with a block of this Dry Jack, and I'd never tasted the Dry Jack before, and I love cheese. But so we just happened to have a bottle of Samantha's open that night. I'm sure we had some other stuff open too, but we had a bottle of Samantha's open. And I tasted it with the cheese, and it was like, bloody hell, what is that cheese? And it was the Dry Jack, and it's unbelievable with Samantha's. It's just fantastic. It's a shame that everybody didn't get the Dry Jack in their shipment with the wine, because I swear it's almost like somebody comes up and just squeezes blueberries straight into your mouth. It's just incredible.
An idea to do cheese pairings and shipments, and then we'd have to get UPS involved, but I think there might be an angle there. And first of all, I want to raise a glass to Heather for being a teacher, because it is one of the most amazing jobs there is. And by the way, if you're a parent out there that now has children at home with you, I think you can pretty much agree with me that teachers are the most amazing people in the world. And you should be paying them about $1 billion a year, because every single one of my friends that has children at home for 10 days or 15 days straight are going out of their minds and are very appreciative of teachers. So Heather, thank you so much. And please pass along our appreciation, because without her, the world would not be as good a place as it can be. And so we appreciate that. You talked about the cheese producer being a limited producer. You also are a limited producer. And one of the things you mentioned earlier, the Sauv Blanc comes from 2 rows, which is hysterical. Tiny production, 125 cases. Walk us through production and what limited production means, and why it's so important that people go to the website and buy your wines right now.
So the thing that enables me to do, Martin, is I love, and this is something also while making the wine, how Michael Totti makes his wine, is small batch fermentations. Small batch fermentations, you can't do the small batch fermentations when you're making larger quantities. I think one of the key factors in making very flavorful wines is that you maximize the skin to juice ratio. And so one of the things that I'm able to do, because I'm basically making, the biggest batch that I'll get is probably between 4 and 5 tons from one vineyard. And so I'm able to do very small batches. And so I'm able to have very small, like half-ton fermenters going, and I have maybe any one time, depending on harvest, but I'll be punching down maybe like 20 to 30 different bins of fruit, and you really get a fantastic extraction from those very small micro fermentations. And so you're able to get a ton of flavor out of the fruit just by maximizing the skin to juice ratio. And so it's the difference that when you start scaling, and then you have to use bigger tanks, and then you have the cap sitting on top of a huge volume of juice underneath, and you've got to come up with all these techniques to try and figure out how to get that skin, the cap broken up and moved back down into the juice. When you've got these tiny ferment.
Let me interrupt for 1 second, just because you brought up 4 or 5 terms that I know, some of the people know. So first of all, let's do some basic math. You said you might get 4 to 5 tons off of a certain vineyard block. What would 4 tons translate to at the end of the line in cases?
200 cases.
200 cases. Okay, so 4 tons, 200 cases. And then I think the cap that you talked about is interesting. For a lot of the Cellar Angels loyalists know and have been to wine country multiple times. And the cap is not too dissimilar to when you're making a soup or you're making a stew and you've got everything on the top surface and the broth underneath. Same thing in wine, but in a 50-ton fermenter that you have to figure out a way to push that down and break that apart to kind of mix the juice up. And so in small batches, it's a little bit easier, a little bit more intense of a final product, but 4 tons, 200 cases, smaller vats, limited production, more hands-on for certain, and you monitor everything.
I hand punch down my wines twice a day. My wife, Heather, loves it because it gives me guns. I'm trying to get my guns in there. I go, no, they're not there right now, but
I did see the famous Scottish tan. It's very much like my Gaelic tan. And by the way, I'll take one viewer said we need to take a 15-second commercial so everyone can go fill up their glasses. So get going, people. And also there was a lovely young lady, Michelle, who talked about teachers who said with the kids at home, we're drinking more wine. So that's a good thing.
Yes.
So
I know we are.
Now, do you have children?
No.
Okay. Yeah, you're just drinking more wine because you're sequestered and sheltered in place. But
what else is there to do?
Exactly. Thank you, Mr. Newsom.
Have you ever noticed though, Martin? I don't know if you've looked, if you're a man of statistics and a man of science, but have you looked online and checked out how many cases of coronavirus we've got in wine country here? It's remarkably low. And that is possibly, and this is a personal theory, but possibly based on the alcohol level in people's blood around here.
Well, I think if I could be so bold, speaking for a lot of people that know me, as soon as they hear Martin Cody, they automatically think statistics and science. I had one statistics course in college, Steve. It did not go well.
Okay.
Did not go well. That was a long time ago. But I certainly appreciate that there's a couple of people saying nice guns. So
thanks, Nicole. Thanks.
That is awesome. So the tasting room, when we do get past this nightmare and this pandemic and people can go see you, I know the tasting room is brand new. Talk to us about that, because there's going to be some people that are going to want to meet you in person. They're going to want to sit down, talk to Heather, have some cheese. And so where will they be going? Walk us through the tasting room.
So Heather found a little property in 2018. We used to live in Sonoma, in the town of Sonoma, and we had a little tasting room on the plaza in Sonoma.
Nice.
And in 2018, Heather found a little property in Kenwood, and we were very fortunate because the fires in 2017 came right through this area. And the couple that had been in this property for us before us, they'd been here for 42 years. And they had a little vineyard, they had a little barn, and they had a little house. And so they managed to keep the house and the barn from the fire, fortunately. And but they decided that they were going to move on, get closer to their grandkids, I think, and move up closer to them. So Heather found this property and we moved out. And so the barn, we've converted it to a tasting room. And so it's a little barn on our property. And I'm actually sitting in it right now. It's actually been converted to Heather's classroom for the last few weeks, because Heather is now going to be teaching remotely, and so she's going to be teaching from here because we're not getting too many tasters at the moment. No. In fact, we're having 0 tasters. But yes, it's in Kenwood.
What does Heather teach?
2nd grade.
Oh, I'd fit right in. That would be.
Well, I was going to say it's the perfect mental age for me because I'm about that same level.
If she's teaching stats in 2nd grade, I am in. Anna Keller, who is also going to be in the lineup in the very near future. Anna, welcome. She's another Sonoma. Actually, Anna is next week. She's another wonderful winemaker in Sonoma that we are fortunate to call a friend. Steve, without a doubt, this has been fantastic and certainly educational, entertaining. And we can't thank you enough from the bottom of our hearts. We hope everyone spending a little time with us on a crazy, crazy world, that we don't forget about the people on the front lines. We don't forget about the folks that are really risking everything so that we can sit on a computer, drink wine, and socialize and talk with someone as heartfelt and genuine and as authentic as Steve Law from McLaren Wine. And Steve, we can't thank you enough for the opportunity to learn a little bit more about you and Heather.
Well, thank you for giving me the opportunity, and thank you for everybody who joined us tonight. I hope you got some educational as well as entertainment out of it. And yes, I hope that we all get, I'm sure we'll all get through this terrible period. And if you're in the Kenwood area, I'd love to host you. Please just visit our website, mclarenwine.com, and I'd love to host you and introduce you to the rest of my wines, and maybe have a bit of cheese as well.
Yeah, there are worse things in the world than spending any time in Kenwood, let alone a tasting in this beautiful spot. So do yourselves a favor, go to cellarangels.com, grab some of the Sauv Blanc, grab some of this Syrah, which is off the charts, and I'm going to fill up my glass here in a second. And everyone, please be safe. Please practice some good hand washing technique. Take care of each other, be good to one another, and drink great wine. Thanks so much for the support. Steve, thank you. Thank Heather for letting you play with us tonight, and everybody have a good weekend. Cheers.
Lancia.
Long.